Marcus Chen stepped off the plane at London Heathrow Airport with a spring in his step and mischief in his eyes. The 23-year-old social media influencer from Vancouver had been planning this European trip for months, but not for the usual tourist experiences. His backpack contained 3 cameras, a drone, and a notebook filled with ideas for viral pranks he planned to film across Europe's most famous landmarks. The young man's YouTube channel, Marcus Makes Mayhem, had recently hit 100,000 subscribers, and he was hungry for more. His content usually involved harmless jokes and silly public stunts, but lately, the comments section had been demanding bigger, bolder pranks. Marcus knew he needed something special to stand out in the crowded influencer space. After collecting his luggage, Marcus met up with his 2 best friends and fellow content creators, Tom Wilson and Jake Parker, at the airport's coffee shop. The 3 of them had been friends since high school, and now they worked together creating viral content. Tom handled the main camera work, while Jake was expert at editing and making their videos trend online. "So, what's the first target?" Tom asked, sipping his overpriced airport coffee. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed them a collection of saved videos featuring the famous royal guards outside Buckingham Palace. "These guys are perfect," he said, scrolling through clips of tourists trying to make the guards laugh or react. "But we're going to do something nobody's ever done before." Jake looked nervous. "I don't know, man. Those guards are actual soldiers. We could get into serious trouble." Marcus waved off his friend's concerns. "Relax. It's just a harmless prank. Besides, all the successful YouTubers take risks. No risk, no viral video." The 3 friends took a taxi to their budget hotel in central London. While Tom and Jake wanted to rest after the long flight, Marcus was too excited to sleep. He sat by the window, watching the busy London streets below while scrolling through more videos of tourist interactions with the royal guards. As evening approached, Marcus left the hotel alone, telling his friends he needed to get some supplies. At a small grocery store, he bought a carton of eggs, choosing them carefully to make sure they were already close to their expiration date. The cashier gave him an odd look as he purchased only the eggs, but Marcus just smiled innocently. Back in his hotel room, Marcus placed the eggs near the room's radiator, knowing the warmth would speed up their deterioration. He had read online that rotten eggs created a terrible smell, which was exactly what he wanted for his prank. While his friends slept, he stayed up late into the night, researching the guard change times and the best positions for filming around Buckingham Palace. The next morning, Marcus woke up early and checked the eggs. The warm radiator had done its job. They were starting to smell bad already. He carefully placed one in a small plastic container and put it in his jacket pocket. Tom and Jake were still unsure about the plan, but Marcus convinced them it would be their biggest video yet. "Think about it," he told them over breakfast. "Nobody has ever done something like this. We'll be trending worldwide by tonight." As they walked toward Buckingham Palace, Marcus couldn't help but notice how many tourists were already gathering around the guards. Some were taking selfies, while others were trying to make the guards smile or move. The guards remained perfectly still, their faces showing no emotion as they stood at their posts. Marcus felt his heart racing with excitement as they got closer. In his mind, he was already imagining the video going viral, the millions of views, and his subscriber count shooting up. He had done dozens of pranks before, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the grand setting of Buckingham Palace, or perhaps it was the prestigious nature of his target, but he felt like this would be the prank that would make him famous. What Marcus didn't notice, however, were the numerous security cameras tracking every movement around the palace, or the plainclothes police officers mingling with the tourists. He was so focused on his planned prank that he failed to see the serious security measures in place to protect one of Britain's most important locations. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Marcus and his friends found what they thought was the perfect spot to film. Little did they know that their simple prank was about to become an international incident that would change their lives forever. To be continued in Part 2. Standing near the palace gates, Marcus pulled out his phone to check the time, 10:30 a.m. The morning crowd was growing larger, providing the perfect audience for his planned prank. He watched as Tom set up their main camera, disguising it as typical tourist photography equipment, while Jake positioned himself on the opposite side with a second camera to capture different angles. The rotten egg in Marcus's pocket felt heavier with each passing minute. He had left it near the radiator for 2 days, and the smell was becoming unbearable even through the plastic container. Several tourists standing near him wrinkled their noses and moved away, unaware of what was causing the foul odor. "Are you sure about this?" Tom whispered, adjusting his camera. "These guards look pretty serious." Marcus nodded confidently, but deep down, a small voice was telling him to reconsider. He pushed the doubt aside, remembering a comment on his last video that called his content boring and predictable. This prank would prove them all wrong. While waiting for the perfect moment, Marcus observed the guard's routine. The soldier stood perfectly still, dressed in his ceremonial red uniform and tall bearskin hat. Every 20 minutes, the guard would march exactly 20 paces, turn sharply, and march back. Marcus decided to time his prank just after one of these movements when the guard would be standing still again. Tourists around them continued their usual activities, taking selfies, trying to make the guard smile, and posing for photos. A young child waved enthusiastically at the guard, and Marcus noticed how the soldier's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, showing incredible discipline. Jake approached Marcus, pretending to be filming the palace architecture. "I checked online again," he whispered. "People who mess with these guards can get into serious trouble. They're not just for show, they're real soldiers with loaded weapons." "That's what will make the video even better," Marcus replied, though his confidence was starting to waver. "Nobody's ever dared to do something like this. Think of the views." The smell from the egg was getting worse in the warm morning sun. Marcus could feel the container becoming slippery in his pocket as the contents began to leak slightly. His expensive jeans now had a small wet spot where the container was pressing against them. A group of Japanese tourists passed by, their tour guide explaining the history of the palace and the guards. Marcus listened as she described how the Queen's Guard were all highly trained soldiers who had served in active military units. They weren't just ceremonial figures, they were elite members of the British Army. For a moment, Marcus considered backing out. He thought about his parents back in Vancouver, who had always taught him to respect others. What would they think if they saw him throwing a rotten egg at a soldier? But then he remembered a viral video he'd seen last week that got 50 million views. He wanted that kind of fame. Tom came over again, this time looking more worried than before. "Marcus, I've been watching the area. There are security cameras everywhere, and I think I've spotted some undercover police officers in the crowd." "Perfect," Marcus exclaimed, though his voice shook slightly. "More drama for the video. Trust me, this is going to work out great." As the morning wore on, Marcus rehearsed the prank in his mind. He would wait for the guard to complete his march, then quickly approach as if taking a photo. At the last moment, he would pull out the egg and throw it at the guard's chest. Tom would capture. "Ready," they replied reluctantly. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped forward, his hand moving toward his pocket. At exactly 11 o'clock a.m., Marcus made his move. With his heart pounding in his chest, he casually walked closer to the guard, pretending to be just another tourist taking photos. The rotten egg felt slippery in his sweaty palm as he pulled it from the container in his pocket. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus got within throwing distance. The guard remained motionless, staring straight ahead with the discipline of years of military training. Tourists around Marcus continued taking their photos, completely unaware of what was about to happen. "This is it," Marcus whispered to himself. In one quick motion, he pulled his arm back and launched the rotten egg through the air. A projectile spun as it traveled the short distance between Marcus and the guard. Several tourists gasped as they noticed the egg flying through the air. The egg hit its target perfectly, striking the guard's bright red uniform right in the center of his chest. The shell cracked with a sickening sound, and the rotten contents immediately began spreading across the pristine uniform. The putrid smell, which had been bad enough in the container, now exploded into the air around them. For a split second, everything was completely silent. Then chaos erupted. The guard, trained to maintain his position, didn't move a muscle despite the egg dripping down his uniform. However, his eyes, previously fixed straight ahead, now locked onto Marcus with an intensity that made the young prankster step backward in fear. Nearby tourists reacted with a mixture of shock and disgust. Several people covered their noses from the horrible smell, while others quickly backed away from the scene. Parents pulled their children aside, and several people began pointing at Marcus, their phones now recording his face instead of the guard. Tom and Jake, still filming from their positions, stood frozen in disbelief. This wasn't the funny reaction they had expected. The looks of disgust and anger on people's faces told them this prank had crossed a serious line. "What is wrong with you?" A woman with a British accent shouted at Marcus. "That's absolutely disgraceful." The smell continued to worsen in the warm morning sun. Several "Stop right there!" The commanding voice of a police officer cut through the crowd's murmurs. Marcus's first instinct was to run, and without thinking, he turned and pushed his way through the gathering of tourists. Tom and Jake stood frozen, their cameras still recording as their friend fled the scene. "Stop that man!" More voices joined the chaos. Marcus darted between surprised tourists, his heart pounding in his ears. He had never run so fast in his life. The sound of heavy boots behind him told him the police weren't far behind. As he ran, Marcus could hear people shouting and pointing. Some tourists even tried to block his path, but he managed to dodge around them. His YouTube channel, his social media fame, all of it seemed ridiculous now as he desperately tried to escape the consequences of his actions. To the right, a police officer shouted. "He's heading toward Green Park." Marcus sprinted across the street, narrowly avoiding a red double-decker bus that honked loudly at him. Cars screeched to a halt as he darted through traffic, causing even more chaos. Behind him, he could hear the police coordinating with each other through their radios. Tourists were filming the chase on their phones, and Marcus realized with horror that his face would soon be all over social media, not as the famous prankster he'd hoped to be, but as a criminal running from the police. Out of breath and panicking, he turned down a narrow side street. The sound of his footsteps echoed off the old buildings as he ran. His lungs were burning, and his legs felt like lead. The fear kept him moving. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Tom and Jake were being questioned by other officers. "We didn't think it would be this serious," Tom explained, his voice shaking. "We're just YouTubers. We make prank videos." "This isn't a prank," the officer replied sternly. "This is assault on a member of His Majesty's Armed Forces. Your friend has committed a serious offense." The egg-splattered guard had finally been relieved of his post and was giving his statement to senior officers. His red uniform, which had been immaculate just minutes ago, was now stained with the putrid egg. The smell still lingered in the air, a reminder of Marcus's foolish decision. Back in the side streets of London, Marcus's escape attempt was about to come to an end. As he turned another corner, he ran straight into two police officers who had anticipated his route. He tried to turn back, but found two more officers behind him. "On your knees," one officer commanded. "Hands where we can see them." Realizing he had no choice, Marcus slowly dropped to his knees, raising his trembling hands. Within seconds, he felt the cold metal of handcuffs clicking around his wrists. The chase had lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. "Marcus Chen," the officer read from his radio, "you're under arrest for assault, disorderly conduct, and attempting to evade arrest." As the officers led him to a waiting police van, Marcus could see people filming with their phones. His face would be all over the internet within hours, but not in the way he had planned. Instead of being famous, he was now infamous. The police van drove him back past Buckingham Palace, where crime scene photographers were documenting the incident. The crowd had grown even larger, with news crews arriving to cover the story. Marcus sank lower in his seat, wishing he could disappear. At the police station, reality began to sink in. This wasn't like his previous pranks where he could just apologize and walk away. He had assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard at one of Britain's most protected locations. As he sat in the holding cell, he could hear officers discussing the incident. "Can't believe he thought this was funny," one officer said to another. "These kids with their social media, thinking everything's a joke." Marcus buried his face in his hands, finally understanding the gravity of his actions. His passport had been confiscated, his friends were being questioned, and his dream vacation had turned into a nightmare. All for a few minutes of potential internet fame that now seemed completely meaningless. To be continued in Part 5. In the harsh fluorescent lights of the London police station, Marcus sat in an uncomfortable metal chair, still trying to process how quickly his life had unraveled. The holding cell where they placed him was cold and sterile, nothing like the glamorous London experience he'd imagined for his YouTube channel. Detective Sarah Thompson entered the interrogation room, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression that showed she'd dealt with troublemaking tourists before, rarely ones who had crossed such a serious line. "Mr. Chen," she began, opening the folder. Do you understand the severity of what you've done today? Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of authority that made Marcus shrink further into his chair. I thought it was just a prank, Marcus mumbled, his eyes fixed on the table. For you two? I didn't think. That's precisely the problem, Detective Thompson interrupted. You didn't think. The man you assaulted is a serving member of the British Army. This isn't just about disrespecting a uniform, it's about attacking military personnel on active duty. Meanwhile, in another room, Tom and Jake were giving their statements. Their cameras and phones had been confiscated as evidence, and they watched helplessly as officers reviewed their footage, including all their planning discussions from the previous days. We have over 40 witness statements, Detective Thompson continued, laying out photographs of the incident, plus CCTV footage, social media uploads from tourists, and your own friends' video recordings. The evidence is overwhelming. Marcus stared at the photos spread before him. Each one captured a moment of his massive mistake, the head flying through the air, the impact on the guard's uniform, his face clearly visible as he ran from the police. The images would haunt him forever. A senior military officer entered the room, his presence making the situation feel even more serious. The soldier you attacked has served 3 tours in active combat zones, he stated firmly. These guards aren't costume performers. They're decorated military personnel protecting a sovereign institution. As the hours passed, the situation grew worse. The British press had gotten hold of the story, and headlines were already appearing online. YouTuber attacks Queen's Guard in disgraceful prank, and social media influencer arrested at Buckingham Palace. Marcus's phone, which had been placed in an evidence bag, kept buzzing with notifications. His social media accounts were flooding with angry comments from around the world. His subscriber count was dropping by the thousands as people unsubscribed in disgust. Your actions have diplomatic implications, Detective Thompson explained. The Canadian embassy has been notified, and they're not pleased. This kind of incident affects international relations, however minor it might seem to you. The reality of his situation hit Marcus like a physical blow when they began listing the charges: assault on military personnel, disorderly conduct, causing public nuisance, attempting to evade arrest, and several other violations of royal protection laws he hadn't even known existed. In the station's waiting area, his friends were finally allowed to speak with their parents on the phone. Tom's father, a lawyer back in Vancouver, was already working to arrange legal representation for all 3 of them, but even he sounded worried about the seriousness of the charges. Your tourist visa has been revoked, Detective Thompson informed Marcus. You'll need to surrender your passport. Until this matter is resolved through the courts, you won't be leaving the United Kingdom. Marcus thought about his return flight ticket, scheduled for 2 weeks later. He thought about his university classes back home that would be starting soon, his part-time job, his family. Everything was now uncertain because of one stupid decision. As evening approached, Marcus was formally charged and photographed. His fingerprints were taken, and he was assigned a case number. The dream of becoming a famous YouTuber had turned into a nightmare of becoming infamous instead. One more thing, Detective Thompson added before leaving him in his cell for the night. The guard you attacked. He's been at his post for over 4 hours since the incident, standing perfectly still, doing his duty despite your actions. That's the kind of person you chose to disrespect today. In the silence of his cell, Marcus finally understood that some things in life aren't meant to be pranked, and some traditions deserve respect, not ridicule. His attempt at viral fame had earned him something very different: a criminal record and a lesson he'd never forget. To be continued in Part 6. The next morning, Marcus found himself in a wood-paneled courtroom at Westminster Magistrates' Court. His wrinkled clothes from yesterday and dark circles under his eyes stood in stark contrast to the formal atmosphere of the British legal system. The courtroom was packed with journalists, their pens ready to record every detail of the YouTube prankster's first hearing. James Blackwood, the court-appointed solicitor arranged by the Canadian embassy, sat beside Marcus. The lawyer had spent the early morning hours explaining the complexity of Marcus's situation. This isn't just about throwing an egg, he'd explained. You violated several laws protecting the royal household and military personnel. The judge, a stern-faced woman with gray hair and piercing eyes, reviewed the charges. Her voice echoed through the silent courtroom as she read each count. assault on military personnel, disrupting Royal Guard duty, causing public nuisance, attempting to evade arrest. In the public gallery, Tom and Jake watched nervously. Their own involvement as accomplices was still under investigation, but for now, they were free to attend the hearing. Their cameras and phones remained in police custody, the footage now key evidence in the case. Your Honor, Blackwood addressed the court. My client wishes to enter a plea of guilty to all charges. He deeply regrets his actions and understands the seriousness of his offense. The prosecutor, representing the Crown, stood up with a thick folder of evidence. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, she stated firmly. CCTV footage shows the defendant deliberately planning this attack over several days. He purchased the eggs in advance and intentionally let them rot. The judge's expression grew darker as she viewed the evidence photos. The images showed the guard's ruined uniform, estimated to cost over £3,000, and the chaos that ensued after the incident. Additional photos displayed the extensive security measures Marcus had ignored in his pursuit of social media fame. Marcus's parents, watching via video link from Vancouver, looked devastated. His mother wiped tears from her eyes as the prosecutor detailed how their son had deliberately disrupted a centuries-old institution for the sake of internet views. The financial impact began to mount. The judge ordered Marcus to pay for the damaged uniform, cover cleaning costs, and pay a substantial fine. His savings, meant for university, would now go toward legal fees and restitution. Furthermore, the judge continued, you will be banned from approaching within 100 meters of any royal or government property in the United Kingdom for the next 5 years. Marcus's YouTube channel, which he had spent years building, was dying a quick death. Sponsors were canceling contracts, and his subscriber count had plummeted by 80%. His dream of being a social media influencer had effectively ended with one foolish decision. The media coverage was relentless. British tabloids dubbed him the rotten egg prankster, while more serious newspapers used his case to discuss the growing problem of social media personalities disrupting historical institutions for attention. Your actions have consequences beyond this courtroom, the judge declared. You've disrespected a soldier who serves his country with honor. You've undermined the dignity of an important British institution, and you've set a terrible example for your young followers. As part of his sentence, Marcus was ordered to perform 200 hours of community service and attend cultural awareness classes. The judge made it clear that any violation of these terms would result in immediate imprisonment. The Canadian embassy representatives, sitting in the back of the courtroom, looked concerned. This incident would make it difficult for Marcus to travel internationally in the future, as many countries might view him as a security risk. After the hearing, Marcus faced a wall of reporters outside the courthouse. Camera flashes blinded him as journalists shouted questions. Do you regret your actions? What would you say to the guard you attacked? Was it worth it for the views? His lawyer quickly ushered him through the crowd to a waiting car, but not before Marcus caught sight of a newspaper headline. YouTube prankster learns hard lesson about respecting British traditions. In the car, Marcus stared at his reflection in the window. His attempt at viral fame had earned him fame of a different kind, as a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking social media attention at any cost. His passport remained with the authorities, and he realized he would be spending much more time in London than he had planned, but not in the way he had imagined. To be continued in Part 7. 6 months after the infamous rotten egg incident, Marcus Chen sat in his small rented room in London, reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed. The tiny apartment in East London was a far cry from his comfortable home in Vancouver, but it had become his temporary residence while he served his sentence and completed his community service. Every weekend, Marcus worked at a historical preservation society, cleaning and maintaining important London monuments. The irony wasn't lost on him as he carefully polished plaques and removed graffiti from historic buildings, activities that were the complete opposite of his former prank lifestyle. His cultural awareness classes had opened his eyes to the depth of British traditions. He learned about the rich history of the Queen's Guard, their service to the nation, and the significance of their ceremonial duties. Each lesson made him feel more ashamed of his actions. The guard he had attacked, whose name he learned was Sergeant James Morrison, had become something of a celebrity for his unwavering discipline during the incident. News articles praised his professionalism, and the military had commended his restraint. Marcus had written him a lengthy apology letter, which the sergeant had graciously accepted through official channels. Back home, his parents had faced their own challenges. Their small restaurant in Vancouver had received negative reviews from people angry about their son's actions. His mother had taken down all family photos from the restaurant walls after customers began recognizing them from news reports. Tom and Jake had returned to Canada after being cleared of serious charges, though they were banned from entering the UK for 2 years. Their own social media careers had taken significant hits, but they had found regular jobs and were slowly rebuilding their lives away from the influence of internet fame. Marcus's YouTube channel, once his pride and joy, now stood as a digital ghost town. He had posted one final video, a sincere apology, before setting everything to private. The comments section had been flooded with criticism, but also with some unexpected support from viewers who appreciated his honesty in admitting his mistakes. His community service introduced him to veterans who shared stories about their time in the military. One elderly veteran, who had served as a Queen's Guard in the 1960s, took Marcus under his wing and helped him understand the true meaning of service and duty. "The uniform isn't a costume," the veteran had told him. "It's a symbol of sacrifice and dedication. Every guard you see is trained for years and likely served in combat zones before earning the right to protect the palace." The British media, which had initially portrayed Marcus as a thoughtless prankster, began publishing stories about his reformation. A local newspaper ran an article titled "From Prankster to Preservationist," a story of redemption, featuring his work with the Historical Society. On social media, Marcus's story had become a warning to other content creators about the dangers of pursuing viral fame at any cost. Several popular YouTubers had used his case in videos discussing responsibility and respect in content creation. As his sentence neared its end, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. The Historical Society, impressed by his dedication during his community service, offered him a part-time position. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with likes or views. His final cultural awareness class included a visit to the Guard Museum, where he learned about the centuries of tradition he had disrespected. The museum curator, noting his genuine interest, invited him to volunteer there as well. Looking out his window at the London skyline, Marcus thought about how different his life was from what he had planned. His dreams of being a famous influencer had been replaced by a deeper appreciation for history, tradition, and respect. He opened his laptop and began writing again, not for views or likes, but to document his journey. His new blog, Learning Respect, shared his experiences and the lessons he'd learned, hoping to prevent others from making similar mistakes. As the sun set over London, Marcus received an email from the Canadian Embassy. His passport would be returned next month. But surprisingly, he wasn't in a hurry to leave. His punishment had turned into an unexpected opportunity for growth, and London, the city he had once tried to use as a backdrop for pranks, had become a place of personal transformation. The rotten egg incident would always be part of his story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. Instead, it had become the turning point that taught him the true value of respect, tradition, and the importance of thinking before acting. His viral moment had come, just not in the way he had planned, and the lessons it taught would last a lifetime. The end.